watching this recording. So as I said, welcome along. This is the Turn It On Google Educator series of webinars. In the webinars, we are preparing you for the Google Educator Level 1 exam. You don't have to take that exam. You might want to just follow our series of sessions for your own CPD. Today, we are on session 4, and session 4 is around making you an engaging digital classroom. The primary focus here is around Google Classroom itself and what you can achieve with that, but also the sorts of work that you can make available, improving communication, bringing teachers and pupils together, or pupils and pupils, depending on your use of that Google Classroom. We've got a couple more sessions to come through November and into December, and if you're interested in any of those, you can sign up via the Eventbrite link that you used originally. So back to today. We are going to have a look at the sections of the Google Educator Level 1 exam that come mainly under Unit 7 and Unit 8. Unit 7, as I said, is predominantly focused on Google Classroom and all the different features in there to use it as a virtual learning space to connect with pupils that you've maybe unfortunately had to go back out of school. Maybe they are self-isolating because of COVID and they're coming back in. It's a way of getting homework to them or working with them in a distance learning scenario. Or if you needed to and you weren't able to be with the pupils all the time, you could still deliver the learning and communicate with them over Google Classroom. The other side of things in Unit 8 is for you to think about the pedagogical approach and just how you're going to use the tools that you have available to you to deliver high quality learning. It's about making it as immersive and engaging as possible, but it also gives you the tools to be able to manage things like your teaching and planning and be able to still give feedback and responses individually or as a whole class, again, through using Google Classroom. Now, I know probably this is the bit of the Google Educator Level 1 qualification that most people are really comfortable with, because either during lockdown, they've used Google Classroom extensively, or even prior to lockdown, you were a Google school and you were extensively using Google Workspace. And usually the bit of Google Workspace that most people adopt readily is Google Classroom. If you haven't, then don't fear. This afternoon, we're going to cover lots of elements. And as always, I'm really interested to learn from you coming along and what you're doing with the Google Classroom and just how you've crafted it to suit the learners or the staff in your school to make sure that they are all supported. So really the first question I have, and you can pop this in the chat and I'll come in and have a look over there, is to really understand how you've used Google Classroom to support pupil learning at this point, focused in on that in particular. There might be a feature you've used in Google Classroom that you found really beneficial. There might be a way that you've used Google Classroom that's actually gelled very well with pupils, or maybe it's the parents at home as well, and they found it also of a great benefit to them and getting learning at home. So really it's over to you to ask you just how you've used Google Classroom to this point, and we can weave that into the discussion for today. If there isn't anything at the moment, that's also fine. I can keep going and pick up any of those questions afterwards. I can see there's a question here. So I can see this statement, you've used Google Classroom, which is good to hear, and mainly the Chromebooks in class. So interesting to see that you've used that for researching topics and also remote learning. The researching topics, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Is that because the staff are most comfortable with using it for that, or is that the only opportunity you've really had to use them for at this point? Again, you can pop the question in there. I think a comfortable route in may be using it for research tools and then starting to branch out into things like either slides or docs to start to capture some of that research or present it back, or even just share it in Google Classroom through discussion, or you could use it yourself as a teacher to then set an assignment for homework at the same time, or a distance learning project. Thank you for clarifying that. It's good to know how they start. So yeah, creating a slide and working with that in groups. Google Classroom doesn't have to be whole class. It's something that some people seem to perceive that is the only way that you can use it. It doesn't have to be like that at all. You can really use it for targeted small group interventions as well as whole class work at the same time. So some schools will use Google Classrooms for an entire physical class, such as if you were a two-form entry primary school, you had parallel year 5 classes, let's say Oak in Maple, you might have one Google Classroom for Oak and another Google Classroom for Maple. I've got other schools that have said, look, we don't want to use it in that way, and what we want to do is build on the inclusivity element, and we're going to target small groups of people, whether it's supporting with learning needs or whether you've identified there's a gap in their learning and you want to close that, and that you create a specific group for them only, or you could have a whole class group and then just set work for small groups. So there's a great deal of flexibility in how you potentially use that Google Classroom, and it's good to see there from the feedback that's already taken place. The features of Google Classroom itself is that it is really engaging. Most students say if the teacher's proactive in keeping the content fresh, having a reason to come back and use it, it's like anything. If it's a boring old place and nothing ever changes, then pupils will lose interest. But if that's used correctly as a tool, it really can stimulate quite a vibrant environment and certainly a community, particularly where pupils may not be able to come face to face together. They can still feel like they're connected. So for mental well-being, it's also another big benefit. It's helped me massively to manage classwork and homework. Now, some people have just used it for the assignments features and bits of discussion. Others have embraced it, and it's used as a day-to-day tool on things like the Chromebooks, where work is set through lessons, or sometimes people have picked a particular subject or a project in the primary setting, and they've used Google Classroom for that. So it doesn't have to be just because it's there, it's meant to replace traditional teaching methods. We've said this previously in these webinars. It's really not. It's meant to complement them and enhance that, but it's just another opportunity for you as a teacher to keep things fresh and bring pupils in a different way. And it does work really well, particularly I found sometimes for hard to reach pupils or pupils that have got specific ways they prefer to work, that giving them the option to come into a Google Classroom really hooks them in. It creates a thirst for learning. And whereas I may have previously struggled with giving them a piece of paper or a traditional worksheet, all of a sudden they've sat up and they're engaged and they're interested. And sometimes they're even open to doing things they weren't previously, like the small group work, as the comment there in the chat. And it may be that that's a tool that you can use to facilitate that type of work. The other benefit for you is that if you want to go all the way down the route of getting the Google Workspace set up technically, there are lots of third-party sync tools that allow you to link your MIS system with Google Classroom to certainly move in data. So an example of that would be if it's getting the correct teachers and pupils associated with the Google Classroom, well, that can be done via a sync tool in the background. So that whole management is taken away, and what you can focus on is using it as a tool to support learning or communicate between staff and colleagues. And the same will be true with assignments and feedback. Now, it tends to work a bit better in American MIS systems. And over there, there's the ability in certain MIS systems to be able to write back the information you've got in assignments or grade books back into the MIS. So you haven't got this manual task of moving information backward and forwards. It's less developed in the UK market, I must be absolutely honest, but there is some functionality there depending on the MIS system you're using. So quite a bit of scope as to how Google Classroom can really support. Now, we've said during these previous sessions, and it's a continuing theme today, we'll really now focus in on what you need to be able to demonstrate that you have a secure knowledge of and the ability to apply it to different scenarios with using Google Classroom. So the first checklist we have here on screen at the moment, and it goes from the very basics. And I will ask you about manual setting up of classrooms and organization versus using a sync tool. Now, if it's a sync tool, you might need to talk to somebody, because what you won't know is how it works necessarily, because you may be the classroom teacher and that's not your job or not your reason to know how that works. But it is very simplistic with a sync tool. And if you are someone who's got to manage it manually, you'll certainly know the intricacies of making sure that users, such as pupils or staff, get set up in the correct groups, and those groups get added to the correct classrooms and so forth. And then we'll go through today looking at some of the features that there are in Google Classroom that allow you just to manage you being a classroom teacher, such as assignments, classworks, communicating as a class. And then moving on to the second list, just to finish that checklist, there are a few items there about then grading those assignments and how to make materials available to the class, and also messaging the class and making sure you're tracking notifications so that you've got a very good handle on what's going on in your classroom environment. Now, I've got a strong suspicion that whether you're watching this back or you're with me now at the moment, that you've had a go at many elements of those before. So if there's something you think you know particularly well, feel free to pop it in the chat and I'll spend less time on that today. If there's areas that you think you'd like to have a bit more insight into from that checklist there that you're going to need for the Google Educator Level 1, then just shout. I'll keep the chat open on screen, and in a moment I'm just going to move over and share a different tab and go over and have a look at my Google Classrooms and just how they might work in evidencing your knowledge for the Google Educator 1 examination. So I'm just going to swap over screens now. So I'm going to stop sharing that one, share another tab on my browser. Let's move over. So what you will see is I've got a few different classes here just for demo purposes. So this is completely fictional data, and I've got a secondary classroom and a primary classroom. Google Classroom can be used in either scenario. So if you're joining me from a secondary school, don't think that Google Classroom is just a primary app. It's not. And I've got many secondary schools that we work with that are using it really successfully. What you have to do when you're setting up your Google Classrooms is think a little bit differently. So a primary Google Classroom, if I go into my example one here, normally would be set up based on a particular class. And then all of the teaching for the different subjects for that class would happen in this one Google Classroom. If you're looking at this from a secondary perspective, if I go into my demo secondary classroom, usually a Google Classroom is set up for a particular subject or a set within a particular subject. So for instance, this is around a fictional science set. So this might be, let's say, set to Year 7 science. And what I've got is my Google Classroom for that purpose. And then what we would do in the space of a year, we'd cover all the different topics that you would cover in science, but they would all happen for that student, as it is in a secondary scenario, to come and get their science learning. They then go to another subject. It might be English set 3 for their next Google Classroom, and their teachers are joined to those classrooms. It's slightly different in the way they're organized depending on which educational phase you're coming from. Most middle schools, if I've got anyone from middle schools, tend to adopt the secondary scenario in Key Stage 3 and the primary scenario in Key Stage 2. But really, it's up to you, the way that you think works best for the engagement of delivering teaching and learning resources, but also the way that your staff are structured and work within the school. So I'm going to jump back over to the primary classroom for the rest of this demo. But keep that in mind and try and compare and contrast as you go through. So when you've completely got your classroom created, you'll be able to jump into it. If you've got the correct permissions, should have just come back. There's a plus button in the top corner on the right-hand side, and that allows you to join a class using a class code, which I will show you next, or to create a class. And when you go into creating a class, you just give it a name. You can give it sections and subjects. You can even assign it to a room if you want, a virtual or physical room, and then press create. And after it creates it, you'll end up with a little box on screen like that, which is an individual Google Classroom. So joining by class code, if you don't manage your pupils to automatically be included as one of the people in your class, and you don't do that in advance, what you can do is create it as a teacher, and then you can share this code and you can give it out to pupils. You may want to throw it onto the board. They go to their Google Classroom, and then out here, they go to the plus symbol. As a pupil, normally for safeguarding reasons, you don't allow them to create classes. That'll be locked out. But what they will have is the join class. And then in the join class, they pop the code in and then they go in there. It's not going to like it because I'm already in as a teacher. It's detected I'm signed in as a teacher, so therefore it won't work for me as a student or a pupil. But that's exactly how it would work if you were coming to join. The other way to manage class membership is in here. Go to the People's tab at the top. In here would be teachers, stroke TAs. You might have members of the leadership team, which are joined to all Google Classroom so that they can move between, a bit like walking down the corridor in a physical school. They can move between virtual classrooms on Google Classrooms. All you need to do is press the plus, then search for their email address, their Gmail address. It will come up, you can invite them, and then they will accept that they want to join. Down here, you can see that at the moment I've only got 2 students. One is invited but hasn't yet accepted, and dear old Adam has accepted here. And I can add in a similar way more students in, or I can use an invite link, or I can use the short code if they want to use the join code. So there's lots of different ways of getting people in. I spoke at the beginning about having an understanding of the sync tool. So all the sync tool does is it takes away the need to do some of this manual work. And certainly on the people tab, what happens with a sync tool is it will look at your MIS database. It will identify the teachers that are assigned to a particular class and set in a secondary or a physical classroom in a primary school. And then what it will do is it will add them in here. It will also look at the pupils that are assigned to that class in the MIS system, and it will add them in. And your sync tool saves in year management as well. So if a pupil moves on, goes to another school for whichever reason, the sync tool will detect when they're moved off role in the MIS system, and it will move them out of the class team and disable their account at the same time. So for safeguarding, they can't get in when they're at another setting. But when somebody new arrives and they go on roll, if you've got an in-year admission, they will automatically via the sync tool come into here, and it means it's all just seamlessly happening in the background and you don't have to worry about it. The same would be true when we have a look at grades. When we get a grade book up here in a little bit, if you've got the write back feature in the MIS system, that will allow you to have your data from your Google Classroom sent back into a mark sheet in your MIS. If your MIS doesn't support that, or your UK sync tool doesn't support that, it's pretty selective, as said, in the UK at the moment, then it will be a manual job, I'm afraid. But things are improving all the time. LMSs, learning management systems, as they're called in the USA, it's quite well developed because obviously that's where Google started with Google Classroom. We're playing a little bit of catch up there, but as long as you've got that background knowledge of how it works. I'm going to pop back over to Stream. So Stream is exactly what it says. It's a conscious stream of what's going on with your class. So here is a primary class I've set up today. I've only got one post in there about a fictional Christmas production. We're going to have auditions this Friday. But you might want to make an announcement that's related to the learning. So tomorrow in maths, we will be looking at, let's say, shape and properties. Please bring objects from home. We want some real life examples as our starter for the lesson, and it's a reminder for them to bring it in. If in there I want to format anything, such as I want to say, please bring objects from home, let's say tomorrow, because I want them to realize tomorrow. I can have it in bold, or I can have it in italics. I can underline it so that they really do see that it's important. You've also got the basic formatting of bullet points if you want to. It's not just about posting in text. You can, in here, go and pick up materials from your Google Drive. So when you press the Google Drive button, it will open up a window to go to your Google Drive, and you can look at your folders and your resources. You can upload from your computer using that there, but you can also add a link to a URL for a website or resource outside of Google Classroom. All you need to do is make sure that it's there and it's accessible to pupils, and it's not something that's blocked by filtering that you can get to, but they couldn't get to. Often have that with things like links to YouTube clips. It can be a bit of a differentiation there about access. You can either then post that straight away, or if you press the drop down arrow on the side, we're all busy people, so I might want to schedule that to release. And what I want to do is I want to schedule that to release, and we'll say that that's going to be today, and I want that to release at this afternoon at 4 o'clock. And it's having a hissy fit on me, so let's say if I can put 4 p.m. in, and I schedule that, so then that will then show up here And I can see that I've got saved scheduled announcements at the top there. Tomorrow, please bring in. And what I can do is control that. If I don't want it to go out, I can delete it, but I don't have to then worry about being in my Google Classroom. Maybe I'm going to a whole staff meeting, but I know that my pupils need that. So that's there as well. Once you've got your posts there, there are dots on the side to be able to manage those. So you can always go back in and edit it. You can copy a link and you can make another post about a comment that's further down in stream, or you can delete it altogether. You've also got the ability in classroom management, which we'll look at on the gear up here and later, about getting rid of posts and deleting them from pupils, or for you having deleted posts visible to you as a owner of your classroom. So there is a great deal of control, but you also need to speak here about pupil charters. Just like in a physical classroom, you'd have behavioural rules, and you expect the same in a virtual classroom. And for them to only put appropriate things on stream, you can, if you want to, have stream locked out so they don't have it available. But I would encourage you to leave it available and talk about good use of stream and working together as a class community in the virtual environment. If you want to make your team looks slightly different, you can customize up here. You can upload photos, you can select themes. So if you want school branding, or you've already got a structure in school, such I used the tree names earlier, and this is maple class, you can have a picture of a maple behind, or however you want it to look. You can also have Google Meets. So we looked at Google Meets in the last session. If you're using Google Meets to keep in touch, you can have a Google Meet where you generate a Google Meet link, and it will then be something that you can make visible to pupils and students, or you can have it hidden. You can share it as another post. Just going to come out of that. But on the side here as well, you've got ways to manage your Google Meets. Now, Google Meets, as we looked at in the last session with calendar, they can be calendared events. And then those calendared events can be shared here as an announcement in stream, so that if you've got a live maths lesson for an hour in the morning and you've got the pupils there at home and the pupils that are in class with you, you could join together, because the pupils at home could click the Meet link from their calendar, and then it would all be linked through Google Classroom. Also, when you get to it, if you've got upcoming work that's due, it will start to list out here. So it's a reminder that for you as a teacher, there's work to get in, but also as a pupil, because they would see a similar view, that they've got that too. Just before I move on, I've covered quite a bit in a very timely manner there about streams. I'm just going to go over and check if there's any questions. I can see that you've commented about you're not using Guardians yet, and how does that work? It's a fairly new feature from the revision of Google Classroom in recent times. So if I just jump over and go to people, here I've got my pupil, which is Adam, and Adam's got certain legal guardians which we would want to permit to have access. So they've got to have a Google or a Gmail account. It won't work if, for instance, they were on Office 365 at home, but you could pop in, and I haven't got a fictional account I can do in here, but you pop in their Gmail or Google account, and you press invite. And then for their child, they can see, for instance, the assignment grades that they've got assigned, which may be a good thing or a bad thing for you as a teacher, but they can also see classwork for them, and they can also see people. A lot of people said they wanted to get parents visibility of work that was set, and that's fine and good, but also people being parents or guardians will be supporting their child, and they're probably going to see their child logged in. Got a few comments back saying, well, as a parent, I can see all the names of the children in this Google Classroom. Well, yes, you can, but just like a physical real world classroom, your child will know the name of every other child in their class. It's just human nature. And you're probably going to have an awareness as a parent or a guardian of a lot of those children too. So you need to talk to parents about, if you're not inviting them in through the invite guardians to look at the work that's relevant to their child only, and they are looking over the shoulder of their child, they need to be respectful of the names or the comments they see in here. And also remind them that it's not a vehicle to suddenly contacting the teacher and sending them messages, that there's probably other routes, such as a phone number for school or an email address for school where an appropriate meeting can be set up, or a phone call can be made home, that it's not for them to hijack their child's Google Classroom and use that for their own agenda. Also, it's not for them to take data out. And it's something that we talk about. There isn't a sign-up agreement. There is if you invite them as a guardian, but there isn't if there's one for coming into Google Classroom. So talk about whether you want to have an agreement for school, an acceptable use policy that covers all of that, and just being courteous and having certain protocols set up, which means what's in your Google Classroom doesn't suddenly get exported or taken out, or someone snaps a photograph of that and decides to share it on social media. There's all those extra layers, but it happens once in a blue moon because most people are very level-headed and they know as parents that they wouldn't want their child's information spread around, so they don't do it for the other children. Classwork is where you can manage your classwork for your pupils that you have. Now you can see here down the side, I've got some topics that I've set up previously. So I could go into all my topics, and I've got computing in English. Now over here, that just helps me to organize, and instead of having one big list, I can keep things quite neatly in my list. So here I've got topic work, which might be Romans, it might be Egyptians or whatever else. I've got my maths and English, which I'm going to use quite a bit as it's quite a heavy curriculum for maths and English in primary. And then I might have other subjects like computing, or I might have geography or arts and so forth. If I want to create something under classwork, it's create. And you can make a whole range of different things in here. So it might be that you're going to have an assignment, and that's usually a piece of work to do at home and then have back in by a certain date. Quiz assignments uses Google Forms, and Google Forms, it does require a little bit of effort to create a Google form, but the Google form itself can be used to make a resource that could be brought back and used again in another year for you as a teacher, so cutting down on workloads, but also it can mark itself. You could pose a question, and the question might be a stimulus to learning, or you could use it to share materials to support the learning, or you can reuse a previous post, or you can make another topic. So if you want to get another topic, click on topic, and that's where you can type your topic and you can add it in. I'm just going to cancel for now. So let's say we are going to put in some material for class. So the title might be, let's have a maths topic, and let's have something for maths about counting. No, let's have Roman numerals. So that's going to be a resource for Roman numerals. And the description is going to be worksheet to be used in today's lesson. So this would be a possible way of working if you're going to use Google Classroom in the class. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab that from my Google Drive, because that resource is in my Google Drive. So I'm going to go over to my Drive, and I think I put this in teaching. And in teaching, I've got maths. And then what I will go into is to grab some resources from an external source that's there about year 4 for Roman numerals, and it's about how to display Roman numerals. And just with everything else in Google Classroom, I skipped it when I was in stream, but what you can decide to do is you can post it for just your class that you're working with. But if you've got permission to manage other Google Classrooms, then you can tick them. So if you wanted to post to 2 at once, you can do it from here, so you don't have to go and replicate workloads. But I'm going to say it's just mine, and today I'm going to say this is for all. But I could say if more of my pupils had accepted, and it's only Adam that's accepted at the moment, so hence I can only see Adam on this list, but normally I see 30 in a full classroom situation. I can either set it for all my pupils, or I can tick to have a selected group. So I said Google Classroom can be used whole class, or it can be used for interventions. Topic, I am going to assign this to a topic because it's maths based, so I'm going to say it's maths. If you don't assign it to a topic, it will go to the top of your class materials. And then you can either decide to save it as a draft, come back to it later. You can schedule it for release, so you could stack up all of your classwork or your homeworks for a week, or I might post it now. So I'm going to post this one now straight away. And then if I pop back over in here, I can see that I've posted about Roman numerals. So if I click that, this is what it would look like for them as pupils, and then they're going to click the PDF will open up in here, and they might just read it on screen, or they might have a printed out copy as well. So it depends on how they're going to work with that resource there, but it's a good way to get materials out. Now I might want to set up a linked exercise to homework there. So I'm going to go back in, and I can see for maths down here, I've got my Roman numerals. This time I'm going to set up an assignment. My assignment is going to be a piece of homework. Again, I'm going to see if I've got something that I can use. Let me just have a quick look in my Google Drive. I have got a worksheet that they can write on. So this is going to be homework linked to the classwork. So again, Roman numerals. And I'm going to title this homework, so there's no doubt whatsoever in the minds of the pupils and the parents. So please use your knowledge in today's lesson. That's very minimal in the way of instructions. If I'm doing this for a real scenario in class, what I tend to do is I over exaggerate the instructions on the homework sheet, and I normally have a very short bullet point list of what they need to do. So they've almost got steps in learning like they would with learning objectives and success criteria, but they've got it for their homework. For the purpose of doing this demo today, I'm just going to give you a very quick sentence there. I'm going to pop back into my drive again, and I'm going to pick up the other resource that's associated with the class materials I've used. So I've got a worksheet that will allow them to write on. So there it's the worksheet associated with the classwork. So when you have the worksheets or the resources assigned for homeworks, you've got some options you need to make sure that you pay attention to. So the first is students can view the file, and that means they can't do anything with it. You can have students can edit the file. That only works if it's not a PDF. If it's a PDF, they're not going to be able to edit it anyway. Or what I want is to make a copy for each student, because I want them to have their own version, so they all have their own version of the work. There are occasions when you might want them to just read it because they're going to come back and do something with you in class, and the homework's just an exercise to understand something. But in this instance, I want them to be able to write on it. I am going to assign it to everyone. It's going to be to my class. Points, I'm going to say this one's ungraded. I don't want to worry too much about the points that are there in the exercise. And I need to set a due date. I'm going to say it's due in next week. So I'll say it's due in on the 24th, and I want it to me by the end of the day. School for me ends at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to lock that in. I am going to put this underneath the topic because it's maths and it makes it easier for me to follow. Now, something else that was introduced relatively recently are rubrics. So you can have a rubric. So for me, I'm going to create a rubric, but you can have rubrics in Google Sheets that are already laid out that you can bring in. So let's make one on screen. So the rubric is to give greater depth to the task. So there might be questions on that worksheet, but actually it doesn't really encapsulate what I want them to have. So the title is going to be Roman numerals. My objective or my descriptor is recognize Roman numerals up to 20, and the points are going to be, let's say, 1. I can have different points, but I'm going to say points as 1. The title is common numerals. The description might be use of I, X, and V, let's say. And then you can have more, and then there could be a level 2, and there's 2 points for that, and that might be different numerals. So you can have, let me go up, that it goes on and on like that. Now, I won't waste a lot of more time like that. I tend to like mine ascending. It makes more sense in my head, but you can have yours however you want. There are other options hidden in here. You can duplicate criteria if it makes it quicker for you, and you can move things up and down in their order. But once you're happy with it, you press save. That will then save it, and then my rubric associated with the numerals work is there. Now, if they were turning in a piece of written work, let's say in a Google Doc, and you know you've asked for a paragraph of writing, you want to know whether they've been copying and pasting, you can tick the check for plagiarism tool, and once that's ticked, it will automatically check with other web sources if they just copied and pasted Wikipedia, for instance, and popped in for you to try and palm it off as their own work. Although you're obviously going to have a very good idea because you're going to know the level of writing that a pupil uses. So I'm going to assign that. I'm going to make it live straight away. So that's going to assign, and then you will see down in here, I've got my Roman numerals, and I could have titled that classwork, I guess. And I've got my Roman numerals homework, and that's all there underneath maths. If I didn't categorize this in topics, it would just end up as a big long list at the top, and it can be harder to follow. Everything that you're going to do is also associated with a class drive folder. So it's like another version of Google Drive, and that will be where you will get all of the resources that we've assigned for class and so forth stored. And most of the time, as a default, you leave that open for people to go in. You've also got a class calendar, and that is also where you can organize class meets if they're associated with classwork and so forth. So the classwork tab is really useful for getting work out there for a daily basis in class. Certainly to be Google Educator Level 1, you need to demonstrate you can make good use of this in different contexts. And then over here, when it comes to grades, once you've set some classwork and homework, what you'll see is for the students or pupils you've got that are in there, you've got individual grades, but you've also got overall grades, and we'll show you how those can be changed next. But for each one, what you can do is you can view the work that they've submitted, or you can return comments back. So return submitted assignment means that you return it back to them. Well, I haven't done it yet, so in this example, I'm not going to. But you can view the work submitted, and then the work submitted will appear on another screen, and you can see, if I swap my screen share, you can see just exactly what that person has done. I'll quickly flick over to that other tab for you. Share that. So in here, this is what it would look like for you going in to view what they've done. So if they did fill this in, they've sent it back in some scanned way, or they've inked on top of it. There you go. You can see the work they've given back. That's the worksheet questions. On the side here, you've got your rubric, so you can say whether level 1, level 2. You can also add comments for private feedback and send them back. So it might be, please use the in an example. Progress. And that will not be visible to other pupils or students, so it's entirely private. Often people worry that that's going to be seen by others, and I've also had parents that are quite concerned and worried by that too. You can also use a comment bank, and the comment bank will allow you to, if you come into here, the comment bank will allow you to pick up comments from there if they've been set and created in advance, or if you want to create your own comments. So if you know you're saying similar things in homework feedback for a lot of pupils in your class, what you can do is set up some common comments, and you just do that by pressing the add. So it might be great use of, not particularly constructive, but it might be the and X, because that was in our rubric, and go add. That's then there to use, so we could then bring that in, and we can then have it in here as part of our feedback, and then we can post it, and that will go back to our pupil. You can see that it's there for them to see, and you can return the work as well if you want. So there's quite a high degree of control, and to move between them If you've got more students that are assigned and in your class, you can flick through them so you can stay in this window. So this can be used a bit like a virtual mark book to move between the work that's set and submitted and then brought back to you. So you don't have to lug a load of books home. Also, it does, as I said, it helps to keep the interest of pupils for them to have work sometimes or homework set in different ways, just keeps it fresh, and they tend to respond to it pretty positively. I'm just going to jump back over to my Google Classroom and reshare that screen. So you will be back on my mark bucket. And once I've given that and it's returned, I'll start to get marks that are feeding in here. So that's grades in conjunction with classwork. And all of those you need to have a thorough use of and be able to contextualize that within your role and use examples of that in the level 1 examination. But what we haven't done yet is we haven't looked at the settings gear up here. So if you press that, what you can do is you can go in and you've got class name, but you can rename it. You can also give a description to your class. So that might be, let's say we are year 4. And we might have a room as well, and might have a subject if you're secondary. And then scrolling down, this is where you can find your class codes if you want to give that so they can join independently. Invite links if you want to send that to someone. You can turn invite codes off. So once you've got all of your pupils in, to stop anyone else sharing that code, you can turn that off so nobody else can jump in. You've also got class codes that can be displayed on screen there. Then stream. We spoke at the beginning about posts and comments. If you want to, you can stop people commenting, or you can have it only the teachers can comment and students and pupils can't. As I said, I tend to work on the philosophy that I want them to be involved in my community, and I will encourage them to act and behave appropriately rather than stopping them from using it. You could also get notifications, whether you want to show condensed notifications or have no notifications whatsoever. So you're notified of events going on in your stream. And for you as a teacher, you could toggle on deleted items. So if you've deleted something, it was an inappropriate comment from a pupil, you'd be able to see that comment that had been deleted, but the other pupils wouldn't be able to see that. And then you can have this thing called Guardian Summaries if you've got Guardian Summaries in there. But we need to get some Guardians in first. So an example of that would be an email about missing work. It might be about upcoming homework. And as a guardian, I'm aware of what my child has to have in by the end of the week, how many pieces of homework, what they are, and so forth. So you can get those things called Guardian Summaries sent out, and that's managed automatically for you. So if you're if you're relaying homework through a paper homework diary, or you're hoping a piece of paper gets home in a book bag, it can be another way, using the nominated Google email address from the Guardian, of making sure that they get directly to their inbox a summary of what their child's got. A lot of people say that they've had a great deal of success from that, but the big hurdle is making sure your parents have a Google email address in order to do that. The Google Meets that's linked to your Google Classroom can be managed in here. So you can have it visible to students, or you can have it only visible to you. I tend to leave that off unless I'm doing something like working with sixth formers, and I can guarantee that they're of a level of maturity to make good use of that. And then grading is the last section in here. So you can have an overall grade calculation. So at the moment I've got none, but I could have total points, or I could have it weighted by a certain category. I think I'll have total points because it's useful to know the total points for the class. And I can show the overall grading to the students, or we can keep it private. So they might want to know, compared to the score they got, what's the average for the class. Now, you might have a class full of pupils that can cope with that, or you might have some that are really demotivated by that. So you can choose whether you turn that on or off. And you can also add grade categories down here. So you might say there's a grade category for maths, or you might be for fraction in maths, and the grade category is out of a certain number of points, so it could be out of 50. Personally, myself, I haven't found a massive use for grade categories, but I know some people love them, and it's personal preference. Once you've got all of that set up just how you want it for your class, press save. You'll be back into your classroom, and then you've got all the changes that you would have applied back in the settings pane over here. And if anything's visibly changed, such as you wanted to stop people joining and the class code's gone, then that box wouldn't be there. If you've got work coming up soon in the next few days, you start to see it there and so forth. So there's this huge scope of what you can do, but also that it's very much expected from the Google Educator Level 1 standpoint that you can do everything we've just shown you there. But also it's extremely useful to make the maximum use of Google Classroom as a product for you in school, to know that those options are there. I'm just going to come back over to the chat a minute and have a look at what's in there in the way of comments that people have made, and see some comments in there, so pick those up. So you can see the comment there about having some children off that are isolating at the moment. So being able to create a topic and giving week commencing, it does help. It's that inclusivity again, about they've got somewhere to go and work that you can get to. And for you as a teacher, I find it a lot easier to manage that by adding it into an online environment than I do trying to photocopy sheets, leave them in the reception. The parents got to be able to come in if they're not isolating also, because maybe they've had a positive test. So there's all of those little barriers that wouldn't normally be there that have been taken away. Now, I do fully accept that tech poverty might be a thing at home. So they might have a fast broadband connection. They might only have one shared device. They may only have a mobile phone or a tablet. All of those things do need to be taken into consideration. But what we're saying is Google Classroom could be one possible additional tool that you could use in your arsenal to communicate or get work out, compared to more traditional methods. Yeah, I wish there was an option to show you as your title instead. Yeah, you can see I'm appearing as Martin instead of Mr. Long. Something I was going to go and explore myself, whether that's possible to change it in the users. And if you change your user settings, that you can be known by your title and your surname rather than your forename and your surname. I believe there is a way to do that, but I need to go and experiment myself as to whether that's possible, and then how that would then be reflected over in your Google Classroom. And I can see there's a question there. Can you explain the best use of points for primary? So what I tend to do, if I nip back over to my classroom, if it was, let's say, the homework, and then in the homework I've got my sheet, and then I need to swap windows again. Let me just swap over and swap the window that you're seeing and just get onto that next tab. So if it was the Roman numerals homework, and in here obviously this is a PDF sheet, but the only time I find a good use of points is when either I'm doing it for motivational reasons or I'm setting a class challenge. If I've been a year 6 teacher and we're doing the dreaded SATs, and there's a certain number of practice questions and they've got a certain number of points. So if these grey bars on the side actually had points per question, I may use points then to say, look, there was 1 point available here, 3 points available there, because actually there's three questions in 1 point there and 2 points there. So it's a total number of points available for that double page spread. That's really the only time I use points. Otherwise, I tend to just toggle points off. I've also overwhelmingly been told by various classes that I've taught that pupils find it quite a negative experience to always have a certain number of points to get, or think that if they don't get it, they've been a failure. So I don't want it to have that sort of that demotivational effect, or affect them mentally, or for them to switch off because they feel that they're never going to get the same amount of points as their peers in class. So I do tend to use points sparingly. Just going to swap back over again and jump back into the presentation. So as far as Google Classroom is concerned, we've covered a lot of the key skills that you will need to demonstrate for the exam, and also are just good for you to know as an individual using Google. So I'm jumping back to the presentation and I'm going to share the presentation on screen. So the presentation itself now is making sure, if I jump to the right screen, that you can show all of those things, as I've got there, that list there, and we covered those today, filling into that list there. Really, there's a big focus on assignments in Google Educator Level 1, and even more if you go on to do Google Educator Level 2. And it's really getting to grip with setting those assignments linked to classwork, making the most of rubrics to give depth of explanation so that pupils are in no doubt, even if they're confused a bit by the worksheet, you've been really clear with them in the rubric what you expect in the way of outcomes, whether it's learning or secure knowledge or what ends up on the page of the worksheet, but that you're able to make the best of it, because it does help you when you come to marking things. I find it far easier if I've been really clear with them in the rubric or really clear with some bullet pointed instructions. I can get my marking done much more quickly. So it helps them, but it also helps you, and Google know that those features are in assignments. So being able to demonstrate that you're making the most of that, have a play around with making a fictional rubric. Maybe it's something you're teaching at the moment, and see if you can come up with something. You can always add as many of those level boxes as you want, or take them away and just have one level box. You don't have to have multiple, you can just have one if you wish. So it's quite flexible as a tool to use for learning at the same time. The next part is a bit of a moot point, really. So there was something, and it's still mentioned in the Google Educator Level 1 exam criteria, and I hope it's going to get updated. So there was something called Google Science Journal. Google Science Journal was in the Google Apps stack, but it was recently moved out of Google and made part of the Arduino product range. Now, they normally deal with things like sensors, for science. They also deal with circuit boards and computing type curriculum devices, but the Google Science Journal is something that could be plugged into Google Classroom or could be used as a discrete app to set an assignment in Google Classroom. But it is very basic. It works, and I haven't got a way I can show you it because I haven't currently got access myself, which is extremely annoying, and I appreciate that it'd be easier if you could see it. But it works like a very simplistic like a cross between tasks and keep for, and I think this is what it was based on originally, for science experiments, and it allows you to organize data in tables or create very simplistic graphs. And the reason it was sold off, I think, to Arduino is that they have a range of sensors like pH sensors or light sensors, and if you plug them into your Chromebook, it can bring data into the science journal, it can capture it in a table, or it can display it as a graph for you. So quite a niche product. I don't see that being a major point laboured any longer in the Google Classroom and assignments part of the Level 1 educators qualification, but I don't want it to throw you. So if they mention either Google Science Journal, which is now a legacy term and it shouldn't be there, or the Arduino Science Journal, as it's now known because it's there, then that's what that reference is, and it is very, very straightforward and simplistic, as I say. But also have a little look around. Let me see if I can find a link for it. Actually, I have got a link there. Let me just swap screens so you can see what it looks like. Move over there and show you what that is, just so you can see it. I'll share that. So here in Arduino, this is their Arduino Science Journal. As you can see, it is available. It's available in the Android Google Play App Store. It's also available, strangely, on iPadOS and iOS. There's a screenshot there of a phone next to a computer where looks like a light sensor on a crocodile clip, and it's been graphing the data it's been collecting. And what it allows, I have seen this used and modeled in primary on one occasion, but I've seen it in secondary as well, where that information is coming in, but it saves a lot of manual collection, which is the bit that's wasted learning opportunity. And what you can focus on is the interpretation, analysis, so you get that greater depth of learning, but it's all captured in a convenient little journal, and it's available there for you all in one place. So that documenting of findings is a really good way for science lessons to have your science data in one place, but you've got to get that app integrated with your Google Classroom or as part of your Google Workspace suite or on your Chromebooks. As far as I know, it is still free, but it's making sure that you've got some way of making use of it and you know what it is. So if I also grab the link to that, and I'll pop that in the chat that we've got going on, so you've got that available to you and you can go and have a look at that too. That's in the chat now. But just so that you've got it covered, just in case you see that in the exams criteria, you're thinking, what on earth is that? Well, that's what it is. Jump back over to the slide deck. We are nearly there for today, and I appreciate we're getting quite close to time. So the thank you for me today is for coming along and sticking with how to make most of Google Classroom. You do need to go away probably and experiment with, for some people, experiment with areas of Google Classroom you've either just not used, such as getting guardians in. It might be that you're lucky enough to have a member of staff that's got their child at your school, and you could use them as a guinea pig for experimenting with the Guardian tool. And I've had a few schools that have done that. Other schools have gone away, and what they've done is they've set up a general Gmail address for a fictional parent, and then they brought that fictional parent into the scenario, and that scenario is then allowed them to just experiment visibility to parents of information that's in Google Classroom, but also then how they might roll that out. Other schools have decided, look, although the Guardian tool's there, the headache of trying to get all the parents with a Google email address, we're just going to skip it and hope that at some point in the future they don't have to use a Google address itself. Really, it's over to you at this point. And have you got any questions that you want to ask, anything you want to know, or anything you want to pop into the chat? If you are on the recorded version, then the recording is going to stop at this point, but you're more than welcome to join me on another session. If you've got any questions afterwards, the chat will always remain open, so you can always pop them in there, or you can always email them over to turn it on as well on our general inquiries address. So I'm stopping the recording now.